Welcome to Wednesday's edition of COVID-19. An alarming rise in cases here in Korea, where authorities have recorded more than 300 new infections today. Now, this figure is the highest we've seen since late August, raising hopes for a vaccine in the near future. And speaking of a vaccine, we are poised to explore efforts on that front later on in the program. But here first is our Kwon So-ah. So do give us the details on this disturbing surge in cases here in Korea.
Yes, Sunny. As you said, the country reported over 300 COVID-19 cases this Wednesday, 313 to be exact. And it's the first time in 81 days or since late August that we are seeing a number at this level. And we're also seeing a spike in domestic infections as well as imported cases, 245. That's the highest in 77 days. And 68 is a 4-month high. Now, with that, the country has a total of 29,311 infections, and also fatalities are closer to 500 now with 496. And if we go over to our graph now, for 5 straight days, we have numbers above 200. And also for the 6th consecutive day, we are seeing a steady rise in infections.
And so I hear what is worrying authorities at the moment is the pattern of the latest outbreak.
Right, Sunny, you made a good point there. While earlier in the year we dealt with massive cluster infections related to a religious group, clubs and rallies, but what we're dealing with right now is not one large cluster, but rather small-sized cluster infections that are appearing at various places during our daily lives. And that's why officials are stressing at this point infections can occur anytime, anywhere. And what they are also emphasizing is that face masks should be worn anytime, anywhere. And in fact, especially particularly indoors, and government data actually showed that among virus prevention regulations, those violations related to face mask wearing occurred most frequently in recent days. So that really needs cooperation from the nation's people, especially ahead of those enhanced social distancing measures to level 1.5 in regions like the capital region, as we're seeing here numbers that we really want to see at lower levels. 92 in the capital Seoul this Wednesday, 87 in Gyeonggi-do province, and a dozen in Incheon. So this region alone has almost 200 infections today, and also double digits down south in Jeollanam-do province as well as Gyeongsang-buk-do province. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also having to deal with a higher number of imported cases. 50 were detected at the nation's airport or seaport this Wednesday, and those most of those came from the US, Russia and Mexico, which are countries that are one of the countries with the highest number of infections. The US here at almost 11.7 million and India at 8.9 million. Yesterday, just on Tuesday, India saw its lowest daily caseload since mid-July, but again, 10,000 more were added this Wednesday, so it's not over there as well. And France has, in the meantime, surpassed the 2 million mark. So let's take a closer look at the daily increases. France, again, here with 45,000 new cases reported in just a day, and the US with more than 157,000 cases is seeing over 100,000 cases on a daily basis for 2 straight weeks. Also a concern in Russia, 22,410 new cases, and that's a place Sunny will connect later and talk to an expert in Russia. So let's take a look at the global figures. 55.9 million cases in total, and another concern related to fatalities. Over 11,000 cases of deaths were confirmed in just 24 hours. And those are the updates I have for now. We do not have a government briefing on Wednesday, so I'll be back with more on Thursday. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, so as always, thank you for that. Back on the local front, authorities have extended their special travel advisory by another month, calling on citizens here to either cancel or postpone their travel overseas, given the resurging numbers of new cases across the globe. I have our Kim Hanul here in the studio with details on that. Welcome, Hanul.
Hi, Sunny.
So tell us more about the government's call against travel overseas.
Sure. So Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced yesterday that it has extended its special advisory for overseas travel by another month. This comes as the number of coronavirus cases continue to surge worldwide, with many countries imposing all-out travel bans and airline companies suspending regular flights. The travel advisory, which will now be in effect until December 17th, recommends people to cancel their trips abroad and urges Korean expats in other countries to take extra health and safety precautions. The Foreign Ministry has already extended the advisory several times since it was first issued in March, and we cannot rule out the possibility of another extension after December 17th.
Right. And against the backdrop, I hear we're seeing some gloomy numbers that reflect the impact of COVID-19 on Korea's tourism and hospitality industries.
Yes, so according to latest figures announced by Korea Culture and Tourism Institute, it seems like the local tourism industry is struggling on all fronts. So the number of jobs across all sectors in the travel industry has fallen since the coronavirus outbreak, while wages and working hours also decreased as well. The report, which was released yesterday, showed that workers in small to medium-sized tourism businesses with 50 to 299 employees saw a 1.5% fall in their average monthly wages. Temporary workers also took a greater hit to their pockets compared to regular workers. While the average income of regular employees fell 2.4%, that of temporary workers tumbled 13.7%, nearly six-fold higher. Plus, the average number of employees in these businesses went down from 101 to 95. What's more, the average daily working hours and working days in a week decreased as well. The data includes businesses like casinos, amusement parks, and international conference organizers, covering a wider array of leisure and tourism sectors. The report says it could take an average of 11.6 months for local tourism businesses to recover to their pre-pandemic state.
Meanwhile, Hanil, over in Japan, I understand a growing number of people believe that containment efforts of COVID-19 should take priority over economic matters.
Right. So according to a recent poll announced by Kyodo News Agency, over 64% of the respondents said that the government's containment efforts of disease control should take priority over economic stimulus. Despite a recent spike in the number of cases in Japan, many tourist attractions in Japan have been crowded on weekends and holidays. This is due in part to the government's Go To Travel subsidy program that offers a wide range of travel discounts in an effort to revive domestic tourism. But the survey showed that 84% of respondents are worried about the latest outbreak in Japan, with the country having reported record daily caseloads on 3 consecutive days through Saturday. The respondents were split on the government's efforts to support domestic tourism, with 50% saying they are not in favor of the government extending its travel subsidy campaign beyond January next year, with 43.4% supporting such a move.
And more grim numbers across the world. Tourism in New York, I hear, will not recover until 2025.
Right. A new forecast published by the New York Times earlier this week says the number of tourists coming into New York City will not return to pre-pandemic levels for at least 4 years. The surge in tourism in recent years has been a vital pillar of the city's economy, supporting hundreds of thousands of workers across a range of industries, from hotels to restaurants to Broadway. New York drew a record 66.6 million visitors in 2019 and was on the pace for even more this year, according to the forecast released on Monday by the city's tourism promotion agency, NYC & Company. However, the number of visitors to the city is likely to reach just 1/3 of last year's total. The challenge of attracting visitors back to New York in significant numbers could become even greater as the city has been hit by a fresh wave of new infections, with daily caseloads surpassing 1,000 for the first time since spring.
One final question, Hannah, before you go. What is the situation in Europe like?
Well, the situation's not looking any better in Europe. Germany's travel industry is struggling with billions of losses due to the coronavirus crisis. The president of the German Travel Association, Norbert Fiebig, said on Monday that German companies in the travel industry are recording revenue losses of more than 80%, which equals roughly 28 billion euros for 2020. He added that 11,000 travel agencies, 2,300 tour operators, and thousands of tourism service providers are currently de facto closed. With a few exceptions, travel warnings and restrictions have brought the tourism industry to a complete standstill. The German Travel Association called for more support from the German government to protect the 2.9 million jobs in the travel industry.
All right, Hannah, thank you for that coverage. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Back at the local front, imagine a home-cooked meal with ingredients fresh and straight out of a vending machine, because that is precisely what we're planning on sharing with you in this next report.
With COVID-19, people prefer online grocery shopping rather than visiting supermarkets. Like this, the grocery industry has transformed a lot with the rise of contact-free economy. So today, I'm going to try contact-free grocery shopping using some vending machines.
Online shopping, food delivery, cashless stores, or various forms of contactless shopping have emerged ever since COVID-19.
Oh, wow, look what they have. So here, you can buy fresh meat just like any other butcher shop around you. However, there's something very special about this place because this shop offers the ultimate social distancing solution through vending machines.
Just like other ordinary butcher shops, you can find a broad selection of the meats from pork to beef. Here, people can get around 40 different cuts of meats. So why did the shop start using a vending machine?
1인 가구가 증가 추세에 있고 또 이런 인건비 상승이 계속 지속적으로 되는 상황에서 코로나19가 계속 장기화되다 보니까 또 근처에서 소비하고자 하는 그런 니즈가 계속 늘어나고 있습니다. 그래서 원래서부터도 이제 무인 매장이 트렌드였긴 했는데 코로나 때문에 조금 더 가속화가 되고 있고 많은 분들이 찾고 계십니다.
Okay, so there are tons of different kinds of meat here, and tonight I would go for samgyeopsal or pork belly because that is Korean soul food. And when it opens, all right, there we go. Now we have our pork belly ready for our dinner tonight, and it was such an easy peasy way to buy some meat, right? Wow, there are so many different kinds of side dishes here. You know, with COVID-19, people tend to have their meals at home rather than at crowded restaurants. And here, this store has not only cold dishes, but also hot food like some stews.
And it's quite a job to prepare for side dishes, and for those who live alone, it is especially hard for them to cook every meal. And this shop offers the simplest solution. Every side dish has its date of manufacturing and origin of ingredients printed on its package, so you can assure that it's safe.
Okay, this time I will look through the menus for side dishes for my entree tonight.
코로나 이후에 사람들 접촉을 좀 피하는 게 좀 추세가 되면서 저희 이제 무인 자판 시스템을 좀 이용해서 반찬을 구매하는 고객 수요층들이 좀 늘어나는 것 같습니다. 일단은 대면 접촉을 좀 꺼려하시는 분들이 자주 애용을 해주시고요.
What a successful grocery shopping I had today using some contact-free vending machines. So these are what I got for today, pork belly and side dishes. And I think you too can treat yourself to a fancy dinner tonight. This has been 신세경.
On the international front, we turn to Russia today, where authorities are battling the world's fifth largest number of COVID-19 infections with more than 1.9 million cases. Now, for more on the situation in that country, I have Dr. Stanislav Prichin from the Russian Academy of Sciences live on the line. Welcome, Dr. Prichin.
Good morning.
Doctor, I believe this is the first time for us to have a pundit from Russia on our program. Now, having said that, do tell us a bit about
this.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us. Dr. Pritchard, do start by telling us a bit about the COVID-19 situation in Russia.
Unfortunately, Russia now in the second wave. Nobody believes, but the situation is not the perfect. As you said, we on the fifth position with a number of cases. And number of people today, new cases, something about 22, 23. Nobody expected such numbers. And the problem is that uneven spreading of disease around the country. So as you know, Russia is the biggest country from the point of view of its territory, and not each subject or federation regions, not the same level of medicine care, of the system of a number of doctors. And in such circumstances, of course, government is trying to couple with this problem, sometimes send military special medicine camps to cover this. So, for example, in Khakassia is not the best situation. And so, of course, this is the problem for government, because on the one hand, the strict lockdown in April, June affected drastically economy of Russia, especially affected small businesses when we had very tough lockdown, when people cannot do anything outside of the houses. A lot of businesses lost a lot of money. And of course, now government is trying to find this flexible way to couple with this problem, to keep economic activities, of course, with very strict epidemiological rules and to keep people safe. Of course, it's not easy, and that is why number of cases still very high in Russia.
Of course, balancing economic stability and public health is a challenge for many countries across the world. Dr. Pritchard, how is the public in Russia responding to the government's containment efforts?
Psychologically, of course, people a little bit tired, especially after the first wave of disease. People were locked down at their homes, and it was really impossible to sometimes to buy something or to visit your cutting, for example. And in such circumstances, of course, people at this period of time very tired. And just after when released all of these lockdown measures, people tried to visit their relatives, to go to the cinema when it was possible, to go to cafes and restaurants. And of course, it had very negative results. Now people, of course, trying to find this new style of life in new conditions, because yes, now there is the second wave, there is a high possibility of the third wave, and in such circumstances, people is trying to find this balance with the epidemiological strict rules and with the usual lifestyle. Of course, it's not easy, especially with travels. So Russian people started to travel not such long time ago, and for them, this is a very important part of their lives. Now they are closed, and for example, for upcoming days of New Year and our Christian holidays, all Russian internal restaurants and hotels, they occupied, they busy. So people will travel around the Russia, trying to keep the same style life, but within the border of Russia.
I see. Dr. Pritchard, speaking to BRICS leaders on Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin revealed that 2 different vaccines have been approved in Russia and that a third one is in the works. He also claimed the vaccines are effective and safe. Could you tell us more about these?
Of course, the first Sputnik V vaccine was the first which was officially registered. And now the third stage of approbation, this vaccine is going on, and its result is quite effective. According to the Swiss Credit report, 92% of people who used this vaccine got immunity for the COVID-19. And because of Russian science area in the pharmaceutical industry is quite diverse. We have several centers which are working parallelly, simultaneously on the vaccines, and that is why three vaccines, different vaccines now are in work for preparation for the final stage. Regarding to the Sputnik V, it was the first vaccine which was officially registered, and now several science articles with the results of approbation on the third stage published with quite good results. And yes, the problem is that we will return to the cooperation with South Korea. The problem is that Russian pharmaceutical industry not such advanced as it needed for production huge numbers of vaccine. And in such circumstances, technologically, it's very difficult. And in such circumstances, plans of the government, for example, to produce several million doses a month to start a massive vaccination, it's very difficult in the upcoming days, because to start to produce, for example, even 500,000 doses, it needs a lot of advanced plans, special plans, and special equipment which Russian government is trying to develop now. In such circumstances, of course, cooperation with partners, foreign partners and their industry is a very important way to produce more. And in such circumstances, for example, Russian president suggested to France, to President Macron, to give him license and technologies for producing a Sputnik V, to use French industry of pharmaceutical to expand capacity for production of this vaccine. Unfortunately, Russia didn't have any answer from France, but the positive signal that negotiations between Russia and South Korea were quite successful. And as I know, the protocol of common activities and measures in this area were agreed. It means that advanced South Korean technologies will help to produce more Russian Sputnik V vaccine, and 1.5 million doses, as I know, this is the number of vaccine which South Korea soon will start to produce. It means that this cooperation between Russia and South Korea, between Seoul and Moscow, will be a very important basis for using this vaccine and to spread it for not just for Korean and Russian people, but even for other countries who need this vaccine to protect health of the people.
Right, Dr. Prichin. I also understand that Mr. Putin this past weekend called for a joint effort to fight the pandemic while addressing the East Asia summit. I suppose he was echoing the thoughts of his regional counterparts.
Yes, he mentioned that within this format, countries tried, even in 2016, started to work together in this area. But unfortunately, we could see that results of this cooperation is not so successful, especially the second wave showed us that countries live separately. And now it is obvious that countries have to do something together, have to forget about borders, forget about the different views for policy, to do something together, because this is our common problem, the global challenge of health for people, which affected not just health of ordinary people. This affects economy, cooperation, future of the world generally.
Dr. Prichin, back in September, Korea and Russia marked 30 years of diplomatic ties. And given that scenario, in what direction should collaboration between Seoul and Moscow flow going forward?
Of course, we have something to be proud in our relations. For example, our trade now is something about $24 billion, but relatively it's very, very low result for our economies, taking into account how huge South Korean economy, how huge is Russian economy, how deep is our potential for our cooperation, especially on the Far East. Politically, we don't have such many restrictions for our cooperation, and I'm really wondering why our trade is so low and our cooperation is not so intensive as it might be. So in such circumstances, of course, we can see new direction for cooperation. For example, using capacity of South Korean industry of ship production. Now we can see this deep cooperation between Russian new plant Star Zvezda next to the Vladivostok and Korean industry to produce special ice-protected LNG ship for Russian Yamal project. And this is the new page in our cooperation, and hope soon we can realize potential of our cooperation.
All right, Dr. Pritchin, thank you very much for making the time to join us live with your thoughts.
Thank you so much for invitation.
Our vaccine, mRNA-1273, is able to prevent COVID-19 disease.
We will know whether a vaccine is safe and effective by the end of November, the beginning of December. The question is, how can you get it to the people who need it as quickly as possible?
While we continue to receive encouraging news about COVID-19 vaccines, this is not the time for complacency.
과학적인 근거, 실제 유통 가능한 시기와 물량, 접종 전략과의 적합성 등을 토대로 코로나19 백신의 선택 그리고 계약을 진행하고 있습니다.
There looks to be some light at the end of the tunnel in the globe's fight against the pandemic as efforts on the vaccine front appear to be bearing fruit. Now, for more on the situation there, I have Professor Kim Moon-gyu, who is also the Director of the Center for Global Development at the Yonsei University Health System. Pleasure to see you again, Professor Kim.
Nice to see you again.
And I also have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Welcome back, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Meanwhile, joining us virtually is Professor Justin Fendos from Tongseok University over in Busan. Good afternoon, Professor Fendos.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Kim, we started this week with some promising news on the vaccine front, with Moderna saying its vaccine candidate is 94.5% effective. Please tell us more about Moderna's vaccine candidate.
Well, first of all, I have to stress out that this is a press release from the Moderna, and then this is not the final result, and this is obviously the some report of interim just a result. So we are actually should expect some final report for the more just concrete, I mean, the data and then conclusions. Well, anyway, so far, according to their study, the total of 95 people just contracted the coronavirus, and out of these, 5 were vaccinated, and the rest, the 90, were just received the placebo shot. And then this is I think this is a pretty good just statistical significance. And then out of 95 cases, 11 were severe cases, and all in the placebo groups. And the other thing is the 95 cases included the 15 people with the age over the 65. And then the 20 people were the Hispanic and the Black and Asian and other just multiracial just things, the ethnicity. So I think this that tells us that this actually includes all different kind of just the people from the background. But I think I don't think this study include any just the children at this time point.
I I see. Professor Fendos, Moderna's achievements follow those by Pfizer last week as officials there revealed that their vaccine candidate is more than 90% effective. Now, could you take this moment, Professor Fendos, to tell us a bit about the differences and similarities between these two vaccine candidates?
Sure, yeah. So the two vaccines are actually a lot more similar than they are different. So both of them are experimental. They are non-conventional, non-traditional vaccines. So traditional, conventional vaccines, usually you make the viral protein outside of your body and then inject it in so our immune system can recognize it and learn how to fight it. Both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, instead of injecting protein into our body, they inject a different molecule called mRNA, which gets our cells to produce the protein for us. And this is one of the reasons why people are particularly excited about this method, because protein manufacturing can be very difficult and time-consuming. We don't know a whole lot about exactly how they're doing the delivery, though, which is actually the key difference between the two vaccines. So in order to get mRNA into your cells, you have to encase it within a bubble of synthetic lipids. And this is where the proprietary nature of these chemicals kind of prevents us in the public domain from really understanding exactly what these chemicals are. But we do know one key difference, which is the suggested storage temperature for the two different vaccines. So the suggested storage temperature is minus 20 degrees Celsius, whereas Pfizer's is minus 70 degrees Celsius. And the number difference is also pretty big, 50 degrees. But more than that, minus 20 degrees is something that you could transport in theory with trucks that are designed to handle frozen foods, for instance. So there's a lot more leeway for how you can move it around, whereas minus 70 is going to be a bit more difficult. So in terms of the distribution, we can already see that there might be some challenges for one and not so much for the other.
I see. And the challenges you're talking about is the logistics then?
Correct, yes.
Professor Kim, both vaccines boast more than 90% protection against COVID-19. What does this figure imply?
Well, before I would like to explain about vaccine efficacy and vaccine effectiveness. Efficacy is something that does the vaccine works. So I think the news is mentioning about the vaccine efficacy, but the vaccine effectiveness is something, does the vaccination help people? It's talking about the real world. So a clinical trial of vaccine efficacy is unable to predict the accurately level of protection that will be achieved in public health. So I think it's premature to talk about effectiveness. So, well, still, the efficacy of more than 90% is very good. It's a very encouraging result. But there might be a possible gap between efficacy and effectiveness. So all the ordinary people will feel with the in the real world. So the vaccine should be effective for aged people with comorbidity and lots of diseases. So we have to wait for the final result.
I see.
Yeah.
Dr. Kim, what is known so far about the potential side effects of these two vaccine candidates?
Well, first of all, for the vaccine development, number one priority is the safety, because the vaccine is administered to the healthy people. But in contrast, the therapeutics, the drugs, is administered to the patient. So number one priority is the safety, and that's something that I want to just stress out. And so far, the studies of these two vaccines have not found any serious side effects, and but some participants have reported some sore arms, fatigue, fever, and joint and muscle aches, which lasted just for a few days. So far, I think this is not something that we should not worry about.
I see. Professor Fendos, both Pfizer and Moderna are looking to apply for emergency use authorization. Could you walk us through the protocols involved?
Right, so as the two previous guests mentioned, I mean, there's this issue of efficacy. You have to make sure that it actually works, and then there's the issue of safety. And there are a wide variety of things that you want to look at. As one of the previous guests just mentioned, you want to check to see, does it treat different genders differently? So do you get more protection for males or for females? Does it work differently for different ethnic groups? So there are these kinds of specific kinds of checks and these kinds of statistical analyses that you would like to do. And then along the way, there will be other considerations. For instance, how much can you produce, and what are the distribution requirements and things like this. So generally speaking, when the FDA makes its analysis, it's trying to look at the global landscape of, not only will this vaccine save lives, but will it actually do it in a timely fashion and a way that makes sense given the current situation. And to add on to this part, one of the things that a lot of people are not considering, I think, on general media is that lots of times the FDA's decision to approve something, also, especially in a pandemic case, will kind of depend on what they know is happening behind the scenes in the federal government. So, for instance, if they approved it this week, but they knew that the Trump administration wasn't going to roll out a federal plan for distribution, chances are they would sit on it for a while. So there are also these kinds of bigger picture considerations that they have to be thinking about, even though they might not necessarily be telling us.
I see. Professor Kim, despite the favorable findings so far, some are concerned about the insufficient public disclosure of trial data. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, both these vaccinations are mRNA vaccine. Is very new, so we don't have experience enough about this vaccination. And it's only half done yet, so we have to wait for the final report of the phase 3 trial. First of all, if we talk about Pfizer vaccine, as just Pendos mentioned, it has to be stored in minus 70 degrees. It's something very difficult. And the study include the persons aged 12 to 85, and they give 2 shots in 3 weeks. And unfortunately, they excluded the high-risk group in the phase 1 trial. But the Moderna, it can be stored in minus 20 Celsius, and if you're more than 18, they are included, and they give 2 shots within 4 weeks. And they didn't exclude the high-risk group. So there are the major difference between two. And we also have Sputnik, and we don't have much information about it yet. So the key concern for the doctors, is it going to be effective for the risk group, like age more than 65 with diabetes, hypertension, cancer, and lots of comorbidities. So that's the thing that we are concerned. And also, sometimes we have a very late complications, and it's not going to be known until years. So we have to wait for that.
I see. Professor Fendos, I understand it can take years to develop a vaccine. Like you mentioned earlier, it's a very time-consuming process. Yet, in the case of COVID-19, it looks like we'll have one ready in about a year since its outbreak. How do you assess this milestone?
Right. I mean, so people make a big fuss about how quickly we got here. Obviously, there was a lot of, years, maybe 2 or 3 decades worth of groundwork that was done on mRNA technology and, liposome and synthetic lipids and things like that. So, Moderna and Pfizer, they are standing on the shoulders of giants when they've gotten here. But as the guest right before me just mentioned, normally when you roll out a new vaccine, it's kind of a phased process. Once it hits approval, usually you don't sell it to everybody or whoever wants it. You usually target your sales and your distribution to particular demographics, usually the ones that need that vaccine at that moment the most, and then you kind of take a step back and wait to see what happens. Because as he just said, the current trials can look for side effects and symptoms that occur in a short span of time, but it's also possible, especially because these are experimental vaccines, that you might get side effects we don't see for a while. And so usually in the normal process, you wait a little longer. But it'll be interesting to see now, because of the urgency of the situation, whether or not those normal procedures get skirted, and if so, how much.
I see. Which is why experts are calling for cautioned optimism, I suppose. Dr. Kim, let's take a look now at the efforts on the treatment front then. Remdesivir is currently used to treat COVID-19 in countries like Korea. What is the latest with regard to a possible cure for COVID-19?
Well, cure. Well, it's still just far away from now. And then I think if I just summarize some current status of the drug development, is that the remdesivir is now under officially approved, at least in the United States FDA. So it's not any longer on the some emergency use authorization. And also recently, one of the monoclonal antibody developed by the Eli Lilly was just authorized for the emergency use. This monoclonal antibody is very similar to those that Mr. President Trump just received, and basically very similar to those that developed the Regeneron. And then one of the companies in Korea also developing the very similar monoclonal antibodies. So these are probably just more just front runners in terms of drug development, along with the convalescent plasma at this moment. And then others are, well, we know the some of the drugs are already, for example, like dexamethasone is authorized for emergency use for just some severe cases, which is actually useful for reducing the the excessive immune responses. And then probably some other drugs are still just under development, like the phase 2, mostly phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials at the moment.
Right. Professor Kim, where do we stand with regard to the use of COVID-19 convalescent plasma for its treatment?
Well, so many known factors and so many unknown factors about the plasma therapy, because it's very heterogeneous. And the patients are already on a variety of treatment modalities. It's very hard to evaluate. Anyway, recently there was an Indian study published in BMJ that included more than 460 patients, and most of the patients were between 40 to 60 years old, and they evaluated the 28-day mortality, which was no difference. So it kind of a negative result, but they only showed some early resolution of dyspnea and fatigue. And there are some other small studies from New York, Mount Sinai. They include only 39 patients, and the average of the patient was 55. But they insist that they decrease the mortality and the oxygen need. And when we go back to the SARS outbreak in 2002, there was a report from Hong Kong including about 80 patients. And they also say that early treatment was beneficial for those patients treated with plasma. The institution I work for, Severance Hospital, have been treated patients more than 20. And our physicians believe that it's effective in very critical situations. So we have to still wait and see until we have a definite treatment, medication, or vaccination. One concern is the allergic reaction that might happen from plasma therapy. So the study will continue, and as long as we don't have a definite treatment, I think there's a small role that plasma therapy can do.
Right. Dr. Kim, the wisdom is that prevention is better than cure. Keeping this in mind, should we be focusing more our effort and time on coming up with a vaccine instead of a cure?
Well, I think just for example, let's just think about just the flu. And for the flu, we have a pretty good just vaccination program. But at the same time, we need a drug, for example, like a Tamiflu. So I think somehow both the drugs and the vaccine should go just forward at the same time together. But I think this is the 100% prevention. Well, that's something that I would really just imagine. I mean, that's the most of the one of the best case scenarios. But in reality, that does not happen all the time. So we need some drug, and also maybe just viruses might change. Also in the future, there might be some new coronaviruses. But in that case, the vaccine might not work at just the vaccine that's working right now, but they might not work in the future. So then we have to prepare some other alternative methods to to address that. And then one of the things is that we are also thinking about some drugs which will be effective for some numerous coronavirus at the same time. So we are also considering some drugs for some pan-coronavirus drugs at this moment.
Professor Fendos, along with the race to develop a vaccine is the race to secure it. I believe quite a number of countries have signed contracts with Moderna and Pfizer. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Right, yeah, so I mean, definitely when you have these vaccines being invented and developed in a country that's not your country, it becomes an issue. How are we going to get it? And generally speaking, countries have taken one of two approaches. One is to sign deals where they're buying the doses in advance. So these are doses that would be packaged and then shipped to you. The second approach, which I think is more clever and what Korea has been doing more of, is trying to connect your domestic biotechnology firms with those foreign firms so that you can purchase the license to make them. And so this then, shaves off a lot of time on the process because you don't actually have to wait for the delivery to arrive. You can start making it in your own country, and with also the possibility of selling it to other countries if you have enough. So those have been kind of the two approaches. And I think, if your country has the luxury of having those kinds of firms and those kinds of companies, you probably should be doing the latter rather than the former.
Right. Professor Kim, health experts are calling for COVID-19 vaccines to have a global public good guarantee to ensure that profits are not placed ahead of people. Do you share the sentiment?
Yes. I think the vaccines can be both rivalry and also it can be excludable. So it's a very complex situation. And WHO insists that they want to deliver the vaccination according to population size, but I don't know whether it's going to work out. So I believe that the vaccine distribution should follow a fair priority model and should be based on ethics. And something very difficult, but if we keep that rule, I think that will be good for all of us.
And very briefly speaking, Dr. Kim, what can be done to ensure that that rule is kept, ethics and efficacy?
Well, one of the things, in terms of a drug development and then vaccine development, I think one of the key issues is the transparency, and then just going through all the rigorous clinical trials. That's I think a key element at the moment.
All right, Dr. Kim, as always, thank you for your thoughts. Professor Kim, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Professor Fenders over in Busan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end today's coverage of COVID-19. Now, do take care wherever you are, and our prayers to all those battling COVID-19 as we speak. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.